In this video, we're going to take a look at arrays in JavaScript and Node.js, continuing my course on Node.js and JavaScript for complete beginners. So in the last video, we took a look at for loops, and now we're going to look at arrays. So let's create a new file here in Visual Studio Code, and I'll call it arrays.js. And as usual, I'm going to write use strict at the top. So an array is a list of items. You can think of it like a numbered list of items. So let's create a variable. I'm going to call this days, and I'm going to set it equal to. And now we've seen variables that are of the type text. So I could write, days equals hello or whatever. And we've seen numerical variables like 7.3. But I can actually set a single variable equal to a whole list of things. And the way we do that is, well, there are various ways to do this in JavaScript. But again, here I'm going to concentrate in this first part of the course on stuff that is similar to what you get in other programming languages and that is also very common in JavaScript, just concentrating on the simplest ways of doing things and fundamental building blocks. So we write two square brackets here and then the usual semicolon. And in these two square brackets, I can put a list of things. Now, it's usual to put a list of things that are all the same type, although you don't have to. So here I'm going to write days of the week. Let's have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and that's enough, I think. So this is it's like a shopping list of, well, days in this case, which is a bit weird, but each of these items is numbered starting at 0, and the fact that that things in an array are numbered starting at 0 does tend to confuse beginners, but you just have to sort of get used to it. So to actually access we call these things elements. We call the items in an array elements of the array, and to actually access them we do it like this. Let's write console.log and access an element of this array. So the first one would be the variable name and then square brackets and then a number like that. So this is item 0 in the array. So here we use square brackets to actually initialize a variable. Here we're using square brackets to actually create an array. And here, now that we've got the variable, we're using those same square brackets with just an integer inside to access elements of the array. And this is sometimes called dereferencing the array. So if we run this program, then let's run node arrays.js. We get Sunday, the first item in the array. We could also have, for example, set a variable equal to this. Let's try that with the second element at index 1. So let's write let day equal days 1, and then console.log day. So because we start numbering at 0, item number 1 in the array is Monday. So we've got 0, 1, and 2. And here we're dereferencing the array, getting a value out of it, and getting an element from the array. And we're using it to initialize this variable day and then outputting it. Let's try that. Just going to clear my console. And now we've got Monday. Let's have, well, what's that? Didn't want that there. Okay. Let's try the final element. So the final element is, of course, at index 2. And that is Tuesday. You can have arrays that are absolutely massive. So there we go, Tuesday. We've got 3 elements here, but if you're having to initialize arrays by hand, sort of hard coding in literal values like this, then you're not going to have many values because it's going to get boring to type them. But you could, for example, initialize an array from values in a file or from values that you've created somehow. And arrays can then potentially have, you know, even millions, tens of millions or whatever entries in them. So you can put a lot of stuff in an array. We could have an array of numbers, for example. So let's write what should we call this? I don't really know. Heights equal, imagine these are heights of a bunch of people. So we have the square brackets, and then we have how high they're going to be, 1.7 maybe meters, 1.65, 1.5, 1.9. And we can do the same thing with that, just, you know, like console.log. So for example, this would be at index 2 in the array. So that's index 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's output it, heights 2. JavaScript, unlike many more strict programming languages, doesn't always force you to put that semicolon at the end of a statement, but it is a good idea to put it in. Okay, let's try running this. And we get 1.5 down there. We can mix things of different types in JavaScript arrays. So let's maybe first, though, look at how we would iterate through an array. So one thing to say is that we can get the length of an array. So we can do that like this. Let's get the length of this heights array. Console.log heights.length. So we use the variable name of the array and then .length, and that tells us how many items are in the array. So if you run this, we see there are 4 items. Let's write here items in heights array. I tend to revert to using double quotes because they're probably more common in programming languages, so I'm used to typing them, but I do sort of prefer single quotes for JavaScript personally. I don't know, I just think it looks nicer. Anyway, let's try this. So items in heights array 4. So we've got 4 items in the heights array, but notice the last item would be at index 3, so 1 less than the length of the array. And that's because we start numbering at 0. And this can be confusing. Sometimes we call it the off by 1 problem, or related problems. We call them the off by 1 problem. You have to remember that the last element of the array is at index length -1. So we can actually iterate through the whole array and output every item in it with a for loop. And if you've been following this course from the start and you're a relative beginner, I would recommend now trying to do that yourself. See if you can work out how to do it. Can you use a for loop to output every item in an array like this one? And I'm going to show you how to do it. So if you want to have a go at that, pause the video and try it. So let's write for. I can use let I equal 0, I less than heights.length, I++. And then we can use I to access all the items in the array. So I can write console.log heights square brackets I. Let's maybe put some text here so that the output isn't too confusing. Item in heights array. I could even put item, let's write item I in heights array. Let's try that and see what it looks. So what it looks like. So we get this. So this stuff here. And we've output successfully the entire array. Now, in JavaScript, we can actually put things of different types in arrays. So I could write here hello like that, and if I now try to output that array, it still works. But it has to be said that in general in programming, if you have an array like this, generally you're going to put things of the same type in it, and generally you're going to write code that treats the elements in the array all in the same kind of a way. So you want them to be all the same kind of a thing. All right, we'll leave it there for this video, and the thing to do as always, if you're confused by this, or even if you're not, if you're not used to working with arrays and using for loops and things, you just practice this, try it out for yourself, try to get to the point where you can just write it out from memory. I don't think it's helpful to take notes. I do think it's helpful to type this stuff out even multiple times until you can do it from memory. And don't forget, you can also find my GitHub repository at github.com/kvaprogramming, and then go to the repository for this course if you want to browse the source code online. Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Until next time, happy coding. And this video is on two-dimensional arrays, continuing my course on Node.js and JavaScript for beginners. So a two-dimensional array is like a table. We've already seen one-dimensional arrays. That's like a list of things. But we can create multi-dimensional arrays, and of those, 2D arrays are by far the most common. So we write here, use strict as usual. And let's create a 2D array. A 2D array is basically a normal array, a one-dimensional array like the one we've already seen. Just going to clear this console. Except that in a 2D array, each of the elements in the array are themselves arrays. So I'll create a variable, let's call it animal table, and I'm going to set it equal to some animals. It's going to be a 2D array of animals. So to initialize it with values here, I'm going to create an array. But the thing is now, let's create some blank space here. The elements that I'm going to put in this array are themselves going to be arrays. So this is very much like a table. So for the first row, we have square brackets to denote another array, and in there I'm going to put dog and cat. And then let's have another row in here. Let's have some exotic animals on the second row. So let's have exotic, I mean, for someone like me who comes from England. So giraffe, elephant, and rhino maybe. So what is this? It's like a table of animals, and we call it a two-dimensional array, and you'll see why shortly. So how do we access elements in this two-dimensional array or table? Well, we need two subscripts to refer to each element, and that's why it's called a two-dimensional array. Dimensions just refers to basically the number of indexes that you need to specify the position of an item in an array. So let's do console.log. Now, if I write animal table and we use one index, we're going to be referring to elements. So the elements in this outer array here are themselves arrays. This is an array, it's element 0. Element 1 here, that's an array as well. So if I output element 0 only, let's run it, we get dog and cat. And element 1 would be giraffe, element rhino. But because, so this value is an array, we can use another index to get particular items out of this array. So if we stick with maybe element 1, that's this thing here. Supposing we want elephant. Well, within this sub-array, this is element 0, this is element 1, this is element 2. Let's output element 1. So let's write 1 again here. And then we've got elephant, elephant. If we try 2 within that second array, we've got rhino. And by the way, something that I don't think I mentioned in my video on 1D arrays is that you can set elements in the array after you've created it. In fact, it's common to do that. We'll be looking at more of that later on. But for example, supposing I want to change this rhino element to some other animal, I can do it like this. So we have animal table, and we want to go to that's row 0, that's row 1. So we want row 1. So we put 1 in square brackets, and then within row 1 we want element 0, 1, 2. So we put 2 in square brackets, and we can set that with an equal sign with the assignment operator to something else. So we could put in here, let's say capybara, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, one of those giant friendly rat-like creatures. Now let's do console.log animal table 1 and 2. So row 1, column 2, basically. And now we can see that we've changed rhino to capybara. So we declared a variable and we set it equal to an array. So we've initialized the variable with a 2D array, and we output this value here, which was rhino, at row 1, column 2, or in other words, it's the it's the element 1 within this outer array. So that's element 0, element 1, and it's the second, it's element at index 2 within this. So 0, 1, 2, which is rhino. We output that and we get rhino. Then remember, the interpreter is working downwards through our program, the node interpreter. So then we change it to capybara and we output the value of that and we get capybara. So you can do this as well with 1D arrays. You can change the values within them. How would we actually output the whole of a two-dimensional array? Well, that's a little bit complicated, at least if you're a beginner. So I think we'll look at that in the next video. But the thing to do now is practice creating 2D arrays and accessing elements within them. So don't forget, you can also get the elements out and store them in variables. So we could write, for example, here, let animal equal like this, just storing the value in a variable. And then if we want to, we could output console.log animal. So that does the same thing as before. So if you're a beginner, definitely you want to practice this. Practice creating two-dimensional arrays, so you can have as many rows as you like, and within each row you can have as many columns as you like. Some languages would force you to have the same number of elements in each row, but in JavaScript you can create what we call jagged two-dimensional arrays, where the different rows have different lengths. It's not a problem. So you want to practice that with different numbers of rows and columns, and check that you can get the elements out, you can access them or dereference them, and check that you can set elements correctly. And if you practice that for a little bit, it will start to make sense to you. And then I think in the next video we'll look at how you'd actually write loops that could output the whole content of a two-dimensional array, and we'll look at nested loops.